Hello CS112, today I'll be going over Lab 9, which was def right shifts, which essentially what you would do is you would get an input of a variable amount of ints. This doesn't mean your input is a list. A lot of you guys started coding as if your input would be a list, but it's really just going to be any amount of integer inputs. So as you can see in these test cases, each of these inputs has a different length. So you definitely needed to have this parameter, which the star args just means that you can accept any amount of arguments. And another thing in the assumptions was that the last number of your input is how many times you'll be shifting right. So as you can see, this here is a 3, everything shifted 3. This last is a 1, it shifted right by 1. And the very last thing I said in the assumptions was that the length of your output list should be the length of your args minus 1. So as you can see here, there were 8 arguments, the length of 8, and here it returns a list by the length of 7. Also, to keep in mind that your very first integer that you're given in your arguments is to be what fills in that empty space of what you shifted. So as you can see here, it shifted right by 3. So that means that these 3 numbers right here are going to get truncated and forgotten about because of this line right here, that the length of your return list should be n minus 1. And in the front here, as you can see, it's shifted by 3. 3 of the very first input you're given is going to fill in these empty holes, followed by just the regular numbers from your inputs until it gets to that certain length where all the other numbers are forgotten about. So let's start coding. The algorithm, I've already written it here. It's just a very simple 2-step algorithm. It's to append the first input number of arg1 times. This just means that you're going to append, in this case, a 0 3 times, and then after that you're just going to start appending normally from args until the length is met. So let's begin. So the first thing I'm going to point out is that args is an iterable object. You can loop through it and print out the values, that sort of thing. But before I start actually with the first part of my algorithm, I'm going to create some variables just so I can work with them later on because I don't like typing a lot. First, I initialized an empty list for my answer because we are told to return a list. I'm going to use a length variable for the length of my args because that's one of the assumptions, the assumption rules that it can't be past a certain length. And I'm also going to keep track of the ends number, which is just going to be args -1 because again, args can be seen as an iterable object. And I'm also going to since I use ends, now I'm going to use first. Just arg0 is going to be my first one because, like I said, that's another important number that I don't want to have to keep typing out. So let's start with the very first part, which is appending the first number of the inputs, args -1 times. So for I, in range, I'm only going to use range. I'm not going to use range length because you just are going to be appending for the range of your last number. So for the range of ends, your answer is going to append, what is it going to append exactly? It's going to append the first, right? Because that's what we are appending, the first inputs, however many times we're shifting. So to check if this works, what you can do is just simply print out your answer right outside of this for loop here, and of course uncommon is one of the test cases. And it's perfect. So it's appended the amount of shifts of the first element. So our first step is done. The first part of our algorithm is done here. So I'm just going to delete that off our algorithm list. All right. So now the next part of our algorithm is to append normally from args until the length is met. So this is where the for loop got a bit tricky for you guys. I'm going to for I and range, again, I'm only using the range function here because it's for this case it's pretty simple. We're just gonna iterate through the range of something because there's a specific amount of times we need to append it. But what is our range supposed to be? So I already created variables for this, but you want to iterate through the length minus the ends number -1. This will complete our requirements for an n-1 or an args -1 length. So let us do exactly what we're supposed to do, which is answer dot append. Now, what are we appending here? We are going to append args I, just like a normal for loop, right? So, as you can see, when we go to last, and I actually print something out, let's print our answer out. Go last, we have the correct outputs, which is a length of 7 with 3 zeros at the front. You can see the outputs right here. I'm just going to uncomment all the guys right here so we can actually see what our outputs look like. For the most part, they are correct, except for, it looks like test case 3, we can look at it like that. As you can see, it's only supposed to return 7 zeros, but I returned 8. So we'll look at that together. As you can see there, the input was a length of 8, but I'm for some reason returning the length of 8. So I'm just going to get rid of these other test cases because I did pass those and focus on the one that I'm failing. So let's go back to exactly where, so right off the bat I should know that it should really only be going through this for loop right here, and it should not go through this for loop right here. So as you can see, it's still in the first for loop. Okay, it should stop right here, but it's not. It continues going, and it appends one more. And I did skip this for loop like I guessed it would, but for some reason it's continuing to append here. Now we don't want that to happen. So sort of a brute force method is going to be using an if statement in here, saying if the length of answer plus 1 is equal to the length, which we defined up here as the length of args, we're going to, just straight up return answer, right? And yes, our return value has the length of 7. This right here just checks to see if the next iteration of answer, if that length is equal to this length, which it should never be because of the assumption the length of the return list should be n-1, to just straight up return the answer, because once you return something, your definition or your function stops immediately and it returns whatever you tell it to.